Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. Even though Marko is feeling a little under the weather, even though it's super early where both of us are, here we are, bringing the people what you want. A really, really busy week in geopolitics, so we had a lot of things to cover. You can write to us, jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I'll make sure everything gets to Marko. We really do need to set up that email address for the podcast. We'll get that going soon with all of our spare time. Okay, that's all I've got. Take care of the people that you love. That's especially poignant in light of the Charlie Kirk news. We talk about that at the very beginning of the podcast. We'll see you out there. All right, listeners, we have an hour and 15 minutes to cover too many topics because, as usual, things are nuts. Marko, I'm gonna have to be like sort of a taskmaster today to get us through all these different topics. Also, Marko is a hero. He's off a 20-hour journey from Argentina all the way back to Denver. I'm here in downtown Fargo. If you're watching the video of me, you will see the sun rise over lovely Fargo. Marko, what do you want to tell the listeners?
I'm a little bit sick, but no pneumonia, so we're going to plow ahead.
Yeah, please don't get pneumonia. It would be really bad if I was out for 3 weeks, and then you can't afford to be out for 3 weeks, I don't think. I couldn't afford to be out for 3 weeks. Let's start with what's on everybody's minds. We're recording here, we're recording on September 11th. I just noticed that. This will probably publish later today or first thing tomorrow morning. But the news probably on everybody's mind is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. He was shot at an event at Utah Valley University, shot while discussing mass shootings in the United States. As of 7:17 a.m. Central Time on 9/11, 2025, they don't have the shooter in custody. There was some old dude that they thought that they had in custody that the internet irresponsibly said was the shooter. He was not the shooter. They're looking for the shooter. Seems like it was somebody who was 200 yards away on a roof. It's also not the first act of political violence we're experiencing this year in the United States. Minnesota State House Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and her husband were assassinated on June 14th earlier this year. We've also had the attempted assassination on President Trump. So the obvious question, Marko, I think on people's minds is political violence spiraling out of control in the United States? Are we heading back to the 1960s when we had RFK and JFK and Dr. King and Malcolm X all gunned down in the streets? Take that whatever direction you want. I will also say personally, as somebody who gets on a stage and speaks about politics, a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, you and I are not going to Utah Valley University to debate people on the Second Amendment, so at least we have that. But it's a little bit sobering from that point of view too. So, what do you think?
Well, I think that Charlie Kirk took a bullet for anyone who has an opinion. And you can disagree with his views, but he really presented his views in a very polite, collegial, and often funny manner. Yes, he was going for clickbait occasionally. The Taylor Swift comment always kind of brought a chuckle to me. When he told her when he told a billionaire musician to submit to her husband. Like Charlie Kirk was an entertainer as well. As we are on this podcast, we have a serious job. Both of you and I, we do that job out of the public eye. We give investors a way to integrate politics and geopolitics into finance. But when we are on this podcast, we are not dissimilar from Charlie Kirk, what Charlie Kirk does. And he took a bullet for that. And that is really sad. It's just sad. And I think that, you mentioned a number of people who were gunned down in the 60s. What's interesting to me, and I did some research before we got on this podcast, I wanted to know how many people were killed for their political views who didn't hold an office. Now, why? Why do I make that distinction? Because there are lunatics out there who want to kill people who hold public office all over the world, not just in America, and it's always been like that. There's also something about assassination of a human who holds a political office. You're trying to make a statement as an assassin about that political office. And so I really wanted to go and find out who was killed purely for their views, political views. There were many assassinations, by the way, of American presidents or attempted assassinations where the person assassinating them tried to kill one president, failed, and then changed and tried to kill another one. I think one assassin tried to assassinate Nixon, couldn't get to him, and then decided to try it on somebody else, on Ford.
Yeah.
I mean, don't quote me on that, but that happens. Like, there's these people, lunatics, who just want to kill politicians. Charlie Kirk was killed purely for his political views, not because of a, political office he held. And so you go back in history and you try to find how many of those people, how many of those tragic deaths are there. People will say, okay, Martin Luther King. Okay, I think that's fair. Then you start looking at Malcolm X. You mentioned Malcolm X. Malcolm X was actually gunned down by members of the Nation of Islam.
Yeah, an inside job.
Yeah, it was sort of an inside job. It was this People's Liberation Front of Judea versus the Judean People's Front of Liberation. Like one of these sort of, like it was an inside job of the broader movement that killed Malcolm X. And then you go Harvey Milk. I immediately thought of, Harvey Milk, the gay activist out of San Francisco who was a member of the city government, gunned down with the mayor. And actually, he was just gunned down by a disgruntled council person. Harvey Milk was not killed because he was a gay activist. He just wasn't. It was a disgruntled worker, who lost his job that day, went in and killed him and the mayor, who presumably, got him fired. What am I getting at? What I'm getting at is that this is really rare, what happened yesterday. To get killed purely for your political views, we just haven't had that in the United States of America in a very, very long time. And so I do think this is much bigger and more different from anything else.
In the spirit of, Charlie Kirk, say what you will about him, I think you're right. He was somebody who advocated civil discourse, and he wanted to disagree with people, and he had out there views. I think I might even call them extreme, but I would disagree with you just said. I think you're making the same mistake that a lot of other people are making, which is there was immediate, we don't have the shooter in cuffs yet. We don't know who the shooter is.
Yes, I agree.
We don't know the shooter's motives. And when you, one of the things that was most disturbing to me was, and this also relates to the sort of fact of social media in our lives, the immediate reaction on social media was disgusting on both sides. You had people on the left glorifying it, being like, oh, well, here's what you get for defending the Second Amendment and saying it's okay for people to die. I even saw one terrible tweet that was like, Charlie Kirk lost a gun debate today in Utah. It's like, oh my God, he literally died 2 minutes ago, guys. And then on the right, you had people coming out and saying, the left owns political violence. This is not just the woke left now. This is the entire left. The Democrats own this. The left has to be outlawed. We have to go at these people. There was a guy on Fox, one of the hosts on Fox News, saying Republicans are not radicalized, but they woke us the fuck up. We're going to go after the leftists now and get them all done. And it's we don't even have the person in cuffs. We don't know whether this was a crazy person. We don't know whether this was somebody trying to foment civil war. We don't know if it was somebody who hated Charlie Kirk for his views. We don't know if it was somebody who, we don't know the motives there. And so I think on some level, to say that he was assassinated for his political views, we don't know. We don't know that he was assassinated for his political views. So that's my
all he
first
had.
thing. The second.
But Jacob, what I would just say is but that's all Charlie Kirk had. That's my point. He had nothing else. And what I mean by that is he didn't have an office.
No.
You wouldn't kill Charlie Kirk because, he's the chairman of, I don't even know the organization,
Turning Point
USA. You wouldn't, who cares? So you're right. Maybe it was just a crazy person, but why kill him? A crazy person stabs a Ukrainian refugee on the train. Okay, that's what crazy people do. I think that's why I say that, he might have been mentally unstable person, but that mentally stable person, we know for a fact that the only thing Charlie Kirk was a provocateur, and he shaped debates about what's acceptable to say. He pushed the boundaries of that. So he was a political commentator. That was all he was.
Yeah, and maybe he had aspirations for high office. And this actually goes back to our conversation last week, which is the fuzzy which we talked about the lack of opportunities for upcoming analysts and the how to be a personality in an environment where AI and all these other things are happening. The line between politician and media figure is also kind of blurry. Like Donald Trump is president of the United States because he was a reality TV star. Like he parlayed his reality TV starness into being a president. He was never a politician before. He would talk about it every once in a while, but he sort of was out there on that. So I think there is this line where the people that we're identifying with are no longer politicians. We are identifying with media personalities that we disagree with, and I think a lot of people identified with Charlie Kirk in that sense. So I think you can make the case that, like, maybe there's been some change in the people that we look up to from an ideological point of view, and that Charlie Kirk filled that space. But the other thing I just want to say is, and maybe this has to do with social media, because without social media, we wouldn't have had these assholes saying all these terrible things on both sides. Like we wouldn't have been privy to the bad taste jokes on the left and the foaming at the mouth takes on the right about how everything was going. There would have been a period of cooling down. All the politicians and commentators would have put out statements 3 to 4 hours later decrying political violence, like some of the other politicians did a couple hours later, and that would have been it. So we have access to people's immediate thoughts. And surprise, surprise, people suck, as we know from Secrets of Pokemon, my favorite guy who likes to comment on the YouTube clips right now. And just the second thing there is just the reason that it's disturbing to me, and this was something that Ezra Klein said, Ezra Klein on the left, but I thought he phrased it really correctly. I just want to steal what he said. He said, look, political violence of any sort is an attack on all of us. It's not an attack on the right. It's not an attack on the left. Right. And if you can't see that, you really are lost. And the thing that bothers me, and maybe it's just the social media phenomenon, is that there was an attack on Charlie Kirk. It was heinous. It was reprehensible. There have been other attacks this year that have been heinous and reprehensible. We also had a school shooting yesterday in Evergreen, Colorado. I know you're in Denver. That hits close to home for us in the bespoke world, because that's where a lot of bespoke folks are. It's not being treated like an attack on all of us. It's being treated as a way to sow further division. And that's where the conversation of escalatory spiral, and are we getting into, maybe it's not assassinating politicians like it is in the 1960s, but the 1960s was also Kent State. It was also the Weathermen. It was also all of these different fractures in the country that were coming out that eventually got us, LBJ and the Gulf of Tonkin and Nixon and Watergate. Like you can draw a direct line from that period and the lack of trust in American political institutions. So anyway, I rambled a little bit there.
But that's exactly what I'm saying as well with Ezra Klein. I think this is anyone who voices a political opinion, for the purposes of general public discourse, was shot at yesterday. That is exactly what people should be taking from this. And now we will find out the motive of the shooter eventually. But even if the motive was seeped with mental illness, for example, the fact that that person chose to focus on somebody like this is a problem, because you can see one day how someone might have a problem with Ezra Klein's liberalism, or might have a problem with my nihilist comical approach to serious geopolitical issues, and say, no, damn it, the invasion of Ukraine is a serious matter, so I'm going to blow your brains out. And this goes back to, I think that the discourse has gotten really bad. And I posted an X about a week ago. I made my daughter read J.S. Mills and write me an essay over her summer holidays. I made her do that as one of her tasks. And J.S. Mills, of course, on Liberty, says that the many have as much right to silence the one as the one has to silence the many. And I just tweeted, like, hey, I made my daughter reread this. It's a really good thing. And the left should read it because they're doing most of the silencing. And the right should read it because their discourse has gotten really nasty. And what's funny about that is Charlie Kirk does not fit that. I think he's like kind of the one guy on the right who had a very polite discourse. But both sides are guilty in different ways of not heeding the lessons of J.S. Mills, of how the discourse actually works and why it's so important.
Yeah. Well, and to wrap up the Charlie Kirk thing, I mean, I should have said this at the start. I know we're supposed to be nihilistic and joking on this podcast, but he's a 31-year-old dude. with daughters, like the videos of his daughters like coming on a TV set after an interview of him to go give him a hug. Like, it's, yeah, it just sucks. Like, and you know, like I hope, I hope, if it is some crazy person with mental illness, I'll feel better, honestly. Like for me, that would be, okay, like some lone crazy, like attached onto a public celebrity. That's going to happen all the time. Like people do that with celebrities all the time, and Charlie Kirk was a celebrity. I hope it isn't something more sinister.
But
I
you know the
hope it isn't
problem.
some like larger plan, you know?
You know the problem, Jacob. The problem is that there is a mental illness isn't a 1 or a 0.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think it's a continuum, you know, and the problem is that while sure, anyone who loads up a rifle and shoots another human has some mental illness problem. The problem is that I think that I will be proven correct in the end, that, you know, he was killed for his political views. But yes, somebody who clearly had problems. And I don't think we can, I think it will be a shame if we dismissed it as a mental illness thing. Like Charlie Kirk was killed for his views. Now, somebody on the left can be killed for their views too. So this isn't just like, you know, the conservatives are under attack by themselves. Something like this can then come back and haunt the left as well. My point is just that it doesn't matter who was killed. A person was killed for their political views who wasn't holding a public office. And I think that's profound. And I think it's sad, you know, and, you know, it's meant to intimidate. And I hope that it doesn't. Whatever your perspective is, you know, I think one thing that Charlie Kirk taught should, like his lasting legacy should be that you can say provocative, extreme stuff, but in a polite way that's meant to sort of push the boundaries of discourse. That's it. That's all you're doing. You're not trying to, you know, actually make Taylor Swift submit to her husband, you know?
Yeah, no. And I agree, it's an attack on all of us. And I hope that the discourse, as it evolves over the next 24, 48 hours, and as we get more information, I hope the discourse evolves from pointing fingers to we were all attacked and we should all respond to this in a unified way. But that might be too optimistic. Okay, a heavy topic to start, Marko. So we got to try to lighten it up. Why don't we lighten it up with Poland and Russia? What a light topic we can go to from Charlie Kirk. So this was, God, it's Thursday. Was this Tuesday night now? It's been such a week. A flock of Russian drones. What is a group of drones? A flock of drones? A herd of drones? Like, what is the right, we need somebody to weigh in. What is the right word to describe a small group of drones? Let's go with flock for now. So a flock of Russian drones entered Poland from Belarus on Tuesday night. NATO scrambled. There were Dutch fighter jets, you know, firing $1 million missiles at $10,000 drones to eliminate the threat. Russia has said, oh, maybe these came from Ukraine. It wasn't us. Belarus came out and said, well, these were some drones that got jammed and they went off course. Poland is foaming at the mouth. They're talking about Article 4 and Article 5, and this is an attack on all of NATO, and let's go. Like, we got to go straight to the Smolensk Gate, and like, let's be like Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, 17th century glory days. Here we go. What do you think, Marko? Do you think this was like some kind of weird operator error? Do you think that Vladimir Putin is dumb enough to fuck with Poland right now? I said this on X right afterwards, and I'll stick to it. If Russia actually attacks Poland in a conventional way that triggers Article 5, it's the end of Putin. Like, I'll give him 12 months if like that's what happens. Like good luck if that's what you're going to try to do. Is it, maybe it's Lukashenko just fooling around in the background? I don't know. Take it whatever direction.
I don't know.
you want.
I just love the part of that where Lukashenko was like, guys, look, it was an operator error. They got jammed. You know, Lukashenko's like the guy at a bar. Clearly, he's one of the buddies. You know, but he kind of wants to be on both sides. So he's just being like the peace guy. Like, no, he didn't spill the drink on your girlfriend. It actually just slipped. My buddy, he doesn't have a good grip. It slipped. Anyways, I love Belarus and Lukashenko. He's so funny. You know, I think that this war is coming to an end, Jacob. And in many ways, I've been saying it for 2 years. So eventually, I will be correct. Even if the end is a nuclear winter of World War III. But hear me out. I'm going to just triple down on this. Look, everybody talks about Russian gains. Everybody. The media is just like constantly repeating this like narrative of Russian gains. I can barely see them on a map. Like, relax. Like, there are no Russian gains. They're painful. They're painful gains. You know, Russia is losing a lot of people for every square inch of Ukrainian territory they gain, and so I think that Putin is just trying to create new narratives, deflect from the battlefield, and I think he's trying to create an urgency in the West so that they feel as urgent as I think he does, which is he needs this wrapped up. He needs that last remaining sliver of Donetsk so that he can go back to Russia with that final piece of the oblast and say, yes, I'd have conquered all of Donbass. I think that's the only thing that matters to him. And so I think this is a deflection, a distraction, a feigned increase in tensions, because drones, like, what were they doing in Poland? They weren't doing anything. They were there to be shot down and create news items. So yeah, I do blame Russia. I think it was their fault. And I think that he's just trying to have a fake escalation so that he can get Europeans and Americans to get more serious about wrapping the conflict. Unfortunately, I think that he doesn't understand that President Trump really thinks domestically. And for President Trump, every day that this isn't solved is a day that he's been wrong and where he's made look like a fool by President Putin. And so I think Trump is going to impose those sanctions on India and China, quite frankly, on oil consumption. And I think that he will try to bully Russia with more economic pain. So that's kind of my take on this.
Well, and Trump also is now pushing for Europe to raise 100% tariffs on India and China as a result, at least in part because of this. Or, he had that very strange, I mean, all of his Truth Social or X comments are strange, but it was like, Russia's attacking Poland with drones. Uh-oh, not so good.
Yeah,
like,
here we go.
Yeah, uh-oh. But I hear you on tripling down on your take, but the media narrative is, oh, Russia is testing the resolve of the United States, and they're testing whether the NATO is going to be there, and they're testing what's going to happen. It's like, and maybe I'm just naive here, but let's say, Mark, this is not going to happen, but hypothetical. Let's say Russia invades Poland or like attacks Poland with conventional military forces. My assumption would be that the gloves will come off and NATO will be like, okay, game on. Like, we didn't, like, Ukraine wasn't in NATO. We weren't going to go after Russia for NATO. But if you're going to attack a NATO member with conventional forces, we're going to take you down. Do you think that's accurate? Or do you think that even if, like, Russia fired some artillery at Poland or did a small incursion into Polish territory, that there would still be hand-wringing and it would be like, let's not start World War III. It's just a little incursion. It's a provocation as part of a negotiation. Like, how strong do you think NATO is in all this?
Well, I mean, first of all, Poland itself is strong enough. This is what I keep saying. Like, let's not mess around here. Russia has failed to conquer eastern Ukraine, which is right next to them, against Ukraine, which is a military that in February of 2022 was kind of in a disarray. Other than the javelins, other than the shoulder-mounted, anti-tank weapons, there was nothing that the United States of America provided Ukraine with. So Russia failed to conquer, invade, fight a country that's much weaker than them technologically and numerically. So if they attack Poland, good luck. Like, Poland will take Moscow in like 3 months. This is not a joke. Like, so to your question, like, what does NATO do? Who cares? What does Poland do? Poland alone could turn the tide in Ukraine alone. And Poland may choose to do that and say, like, you know what, we're going to get involved. Fuck it. Gloves are off. In which case it's an offensive military operation, and Article 5 does not actually protect Poland if they just, like, go on a rampage. But, Russian-Ukrainian conflict in Ukraine is interesting because it's, one of the first conflicts we've really had where no side has air superiority. Russians kind of do in their territories, but it's not full air superiority. And so if a country like Poland got involved, like, that would end. Poland, with America's help, would absolutely gain aerial superiority over Ukraine, and then Russian ground troops would be toast. So, that's why I think that your question is, Like, well, yeah, I mean, if Russians invaded Poland with actual troops, if an artillery shell falls into Poland, that will not be an event. That will not be news. It will just be the Russians being annoying, just like with this stupid drone thing, which made no sense. Uh, but yeah, I think that Russians are playing with fire because if Poles get involved in Ukraine, I think that you know, at that point it's put up or shut up for Russia. By which I mean you're either going to use nukes or you're going to have to sue for peace. And I think that most of our listeners just don't understand this because the media narrative has been very, very interesting. Like, I feel that mainstream media, which tilts left and liberal, has made such a big normative issue out of this. Like, Ukraine must win. But for Ukraine to must win, Russia must be an evil giant force. And so there's very few people out there in the world, I think I'm the only one, who just say like, no, Russia's actually a pathetic military force. It's actually sad watching them like launch waves of millions of humans into a meat carnage. Like, they're pathetic. Like, they have not gained air superiority over a country right next to them. They have not been able to move through the territory with ease. And in 3 years of war, which is generous, which we should really say in 11 years of war, because this stuff started in 2014, they haven't been able to conquer the part of Ukraine that's most pro-Russian, Russian-speaking, filled with Russian ethnics. So I think that this is a desperate attempt by Putin to change the narrative of what's going on in Ukraine, which his offensives are not doing great, try to create a perception that he's, the big bad wolf, making NATO scurry along and be afraid about his drones and win some points domestically, but also force some negotiations. That's it. So I think that's my take. And I know no one's going to agree with it because people are divided into two camps. Either Russia's evil, but also kind of powerful, or Russia's actually, this benevolent superpower that we made a mistake with. That's kind of the narrative on the right. Like, oh, we should have been friends with them if only we didn't expand NATO. No, man, they're a failing state that has to export domestic instability through wars.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the regime is evil and the military is also pathetic. I think I agree with you. I'm like 85% of the way there. The thing I bump up on is that this is all just about Putin needs to take the Donbass and then he can take his ball and go home. And so I guess the question I would pose to you to try and get a little bit at it was, because I don't think this is going to work. The drone stuff is not going to work. Like, if what he wants is the deal, this is actually going to be counterproductive because it's just going to piss off the United States. It's going to piss off Poland. One of my favorite Polish commentators, his response to this was, the politics of deterrence have not worked. We have to move towards a strategy of punishment, which is like a top Polish commentator basically telling you like, let's go get these guys. So like they're ready to go. So like you're creating the opposite of what you want. So let's pretend Vladimir Putin is sitting here next to me in Fargo, and he's like, Marko, all I want is to get out with the Donbass. What do I have to do in order to get to a close, get the Donbass, and have my cake and eat it too? What would you advise him to do?
Well, that's the problem, Jacob. I would say I don't know. I don't know. Like, you suck, Vladimir. This piece of territory is right next to you. Like, look, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I apologize, but like, if I could show you a map, it's a joke. Donbass is surrounded by Russia. It's part of Ukraine that juts into Russia. There's absolutely no reason why Russians have not conquered it already. So I don't know. How do you get it? What territory are you willing to give to Ukraine in exchange? I mean, that's the question. How do you make a territorial change? Well, the Ukrainians say no. So, like, I have no idea. I have no answer, which is why they did this, I think. Because, when you get, some believe in a madman theory of negotiations, and sometimes you just ruffle things up. And look, he didn't send Sukhoi into Polish airspace, guys. He sent some drones. It's like to defend Putin a little bit here. He's just probing with a drone. That's what drones are for. He's just probing. And he's trying something, Jacob, because he doesn't know. And he would probably say, you see, Marko doesn't know how I'm going to get that last remaining piece of Donetsk. So why not try to just rile up the West a little bit, scare them, rattle their cage, see how they respond. because I'm out of ideas too.
I love that I basically asked you, like, hey, I have Vladimir here next to me. What do you want to tell him? And you basically said, Vladimir, you suck. That's the advice, the top level advice.
I mean, look, it is absolutely pathetic that Russian military has not conquered this piece of Ukraine. There's no reason. And please, next person who talks about Ukrainian military fortifications, I'm going to punch them in the face. Like, I will get violent. I'm sorry. I mean, that's not what this podcast is about. Or on this day where we talked about political violence. But like,
no, I get it. You're going to be like Scott Bessent violent. Like, how many times has Scott Bessent been threatening to punch people in the face? Like, Scott, you're not going to punch anyone in the face. Like, you're not fooling anybody. Okay, like, just stop.
He played football at Yale, and he did punch Elon Musk in the face. So listen,
football at Yale. Wow. Okay, Scott Bessent, I invite you. Come on the podcast and punch me in the face. Take your best shot. I'm here for you, bro.
I will follow the example of our Treasury Secretary and threaten to punch the next person who talks about Ukrainian fortifications. In 2025, okay, it's 2025. If Maginot Line didn't work in 1940, it's not going to work in 2025, people. Okay, so no, the Russians are not struggling because of ingenious Ukrainian fortifications. They're struggling because of ingenious, brave, and very competent Ukrainian defense and their own incompetency. So I think that's the baseline here. It's funny because in a way, Jacob, what needs to happen is United States of America just needs to put massive sanctions on China and India. And just hear me out. What needs to happen is Vladimir Putin needs to be told to his face, look, buddy, you had 3 years to do this. You failed. You're not going to go home with all of Donbass. You're not. That is the reality. And it needs to come from Xi Jinping and Modi and everyone else who has been sort of nice to him. Like, hey, man, like, one of those interventions. Like, hey, Vladimir, you're home. Why don't you step into the den? And, he walks into the den and there it is. There's Tokayev from Kazakhstan. There's Xi from China. And they're all like, look, buddy, like, you will not get the last bit of Donetsk. And you just need to be fine with that and redraw the borders of Donbass because, we're hurting now because of you.
I hear you, but the U.S. so far has just been wanting to punish India with tariffs and not go after China, even though China's the worst offender. I don't know if you saw this story also about how, the Indians are importing lots of oil from Russia. They're also like refining diesel and then sending the diesel to Ukraine. Like, India has become one of the largest sources for Ukrainian diesel in the war so far. So Russia literally, in the stuff that it's sending to keep the economy going, is also sowing like this disaster.
But doesn't that also mean that Russia is actually supporting Ukraine?
Yes.
And that's why we do this job, Jacob, because of shit like that.
Exactly right. Not to be outdone, because I guess they just don't want a news cycle to go by without them doing something controversial. Israel bombed Qatar this week. Qatar now has the dubious distinction of being bombed by both Iran and Israel this year. Good job. Nice play on all sides there for the strategic policymakers in Doha. Israel assassinated basically what was left of senior Hamas leadership. They're all gone now. It's sort of a big deal in the sense that Qatar is where U.S. CENTCOM is based. It seemed initially that maybe Israel had told the United States. President Trump came out and said, yes, they informed us at the last second and we couldn't stop it. There's also the question of was Qatar complicit in this? Did Qatar want these Hamas guys to be taken out? And their reaction now was sort of what Jalen Rose used to describe as a hold me back fight, where they're issuing the press releases and don't you dare come at us, Israel, and we're going to mount this big, response to you because you can't break the rule of law here. But we're also happy not to have these Hamas assholes in Doha, like, wasting our time with ceasefire negotiations that weren't going anywhere. I loved the media reporting that was like, this is a real big hit to ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel. It's like, were they going anywhere? Like, how long ago was the ceasefire negotiations were not happening. Like, Gaza is a burning wreckage and humanitarian catastrophe, and you think a ceasefire now? Like, the time for ceasefire is already past. Like, it's horrible what's happening in Gaza. So for me, like, it looks like Israeli hubris. It looks like Israel just thinks it has the run of the Middle East. And I think in the short term it does. I think one of my biggest wrong takes of the past 5 years was I didn't think Israel had the juice to go after Hezbollah and Iran, and they absolutely did. So what? They're not going to go after Qatar because these Hamas guys are sitting there? Of course they are. They're going to go after anybody in the region that they want. I continue to think, I hate to sound like a broken record, but this leads down a path to eventually you're going to meet a bully who is bigger than you and who you can't do this with. And if I was an Israeli strategic decision maker, I would be trying to get into the ears there that Turkey is there and Turkey is becoming more powerful. And you can do this to Qatar and you can do this to Iran under this particular dilapidated, theocratic, thuggish regime. You're not going to be able to do this to Turkey. And that in a 5, 10, 15-year time horizon, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they will do this to Turkey. Maybe they'll get a bunch of pagers to all the Turkish politicians and they'll take out the Turkish generals. And again, I don't know what I'm talking about. But what's your take on the Israeli attack in Qatar?
First of all, that was an amazing rundown, and I just want to salute you, Jacob. That may be one of your best. First of all, you weaved Jalen Rose and the hold me back theory, which my good friend Dan Green, professor of physics at UC San Diego, helped me quantify with a mathematical formula in my book. So the hold me back theory of politics is there. I love it. You also ended up weaving this hilarious fact that I just realized and learned from you that yes, Qatar has been, you're right, it's been bombed by both Iran and Israel in the same year. And yeah. And so, I mean, what's my take? My take is, well, first of all, I immediately thought it was funny because, yeah, media reported, well, Hamas is also in Turkey. And, this is, I don't know what's a good analogy of this that most of our listeners would know. But if Jalen Rose was here next to you, right next to Putin, holding his baseball bat, if Jalen Rose...
He would turn to Putin and say, hey, Vladimir, you suck.
Yeah, he 100% would. But he would also, number one, he would talk about how, given that the three of you guys are in Fargo, you're going to have to do some imports. That would be the first thing he would mention. The second thing he would mention is that he would say, when you start a fight against the basketball team, you might have gotten fouled really hard by Rick Mahorn, but you kind of get yourself twisted and turned around and you square up against Joe Dumars. Because Rick Mahorn is out there just standing let's go. And you don't want to go with Rick Mahorn. So you're going to find your way to just square up against Joe, who's, 6'4", kind of stocky shooting guard. He can go at it. He's a member of the bad boy Pistons, but he ain't Rick Mahorn. And that's what Israel did here. I mean, this is performative. This is theater. This has absolutely no strategic, logical sense at all. Some Hamas dudes in Qatar. What is their purpose? What is the logic of attacking them other than, again, kind of like the drones in Poland? I think the media and most of our listeners, they don't have the capacity to sometimes swat away the geopolitics and accept that there's domestic politics. Vladimir Putin wants to look tough. He sent some drones to Poland to make NATO look weak or say, ha, 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 I laugh in the face of danger. And similarly, Israel, as the regional bully, is basically, poking the Hamas in Qatar. But there's no way they're going to do it in Turkey because Turkey's going to go to war. Rick Mahorn is standing there being like, please go at me. Please, I beg you, come at me. The Turks are like, yeah, let's go. Let's go to a war. You know what would be really good for Turkish just nation building, for Erdogan domestically, for everything, would be just a healthy 19th century, not a long war, but a nice little testing of the skill sets, and that's why I think that, yeah, this was purely for domestic political reasons from Israel. There's no strategic reason. And, if the Israeli president was next to you, he would say something like, Hamas operatives everywhere deserve to die for what they did on October 7th. And it's sure, whatever, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're actually shortchanging that a little bit because it's the same logic as Munich. After the Munich Olympics, the Mossad went out and wanted to assassinate every single person that was involved. And all the people that were assassinated in Doha this week were people who were on camera praising Allah and rejoicing at Hamas's October 7th attack. The difference is when Israel used to do this before with Munich, there was plausible deniability. It was the Mossad would go and assassinate people, and it was a wink, wink, nudge,
Yes.
nudge. If you
Thank
hurt
you. Yeah.
Israel, Israel's going to come get you. This week, it was Israel was like, screw the Mossad. It's going to be the IDF. We're coming with fighter jets. We're going to light you up. We don't care that you're in an Arab capital, that we have the Abraham Accords and everything else with. Like, if you mess with us, you're going to die. And I think that actually, it fits with Israeli strategy, and it's a little bit more. That's what I mean about hubris. It goes from plausible deniability to just, we're out here and we're doing our thing. The thing that doesn't make sense, or which I think is different, is what's happening in Gaza. Because did you really, and I'm sorry if listeners are going to get their hair up about this, what Israel's doing in Gaza is ethnic cleansing. You can even start to use the G word if you want, but it's definitely ethnic cleansing. It's reprehensible. Maybe it's strategically justified. I don't want to get down that whole rabbit hole, but that's what it is. In the past, I think, like, if we were doing Munich logic, then this is exactly what you would expect. You would have expected Israel to go out and kill every single person that was even tangentially related to the October 7th attack. That makes sense. That's deterrence, but they didn't just stop there. They've also decided, you know what? Every single person in Gaza is a potential sleeper against us, and we can no longer tolerate this. So we're just going to obliterate the Gaza Strip, and we're going to put up a Trump hotel to make Donald Trump happy. Like, that, I think, is the thing, ironically, that is maybe the theater. I don't know. I'm playing with that.
Well,
push back if you
no, there's nothing to really push back on, other than to say that the very statement itself was very strange to me, as someone who's read a lot of statements. Israel said, the Israeli statement about the attack in Qatar was like, Israel takes full responsibility, and sole responsibility. It was very similar to when, like, a terrorist group bombs a shopping mall, like when ETA or IRA would do something like that. And they would be like, we claim responsibility. This was us. Like, you have to claim it. And, like, that seems performative. Like, Munich, actually, the assassinations after the Munich Olympics, everybody knew who was doing it. But it was part of.
Well, yeah, it was a wink. It was a wink and a nod. It's also like, think about Israel's recent attacks or bombings in Syria. It used to be when the IDF operated in a place like Syria, the press would question them, and the IDF would say, "We have no comment. Like, we don't know. Like, something could be happening in Syria. Like, maybe it's whatever." And now they're like, "No, we hit them. That was us. Like, look how powerful we are. We're really great."
That's the point, and that's where the hubris comes in. That's your whole the part of your take that's really important is the hubris. And I think that there's two things that can happen that way. You might end up picking the fight with the wrong guy, and you pick a fight with Rick Mahorn. So that's the first issue. That's your Turkey angle. The other angle is brand. For some countries on the planet Earth, like, sovereignty still matters. And so, like, again, nobody really has a problem with Israel killing terrorists. Like, Steven Spielberg made a cool Hollywood movie about it. Although, as I said initially when we talked about it, the message was not that pro targeted assassinations. Nonetheless, there's a cool movie, and Eric Bana is fucking killing people.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Awesome.
Like, let's be clear and honest. Nobody had a problem with Israel doing any of that targeted assassination stuff. But the reason that the wink and the nod are important for listeners listening to this and saying, like, wait, why? Why can't Israel just be upfront about it? Well, the reason that it can't is because sovereignty still kind of matters to most countries in the world. And so it was nice when Israel just kind of curried favor with the rest of the world and said, okay, cool, we get it. Killing people in Qatar is not nice, so we'll do it quietly. Now it's like fighter jet, rocket, kill the wrong people, and then declare, yeah, we did it. What's up? So again, there's two dangers here. One is your point of picking the fight with Rick Mahorn. The second point is that in this hubris, what's really the casualty is Israeli brand. Israel's brand, the PR, the brand of Israel as a democratic state with Western values has, like, been destroyed. And it's not destroyed by left-wing campus anti-Israel people. It's not destroyed, like, by anti-Semites. It's destroyed because people like the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, of Spain, like actual countries around the world are saying, like, look, we It's difficult to be an ally. And that's the biggest risk. Like, if you really care about Israel in the long term, Israel's brand as its membership card in the Western club is very, very important to the ability of Israel to survive over the next 10 and 20 years. Because guess what? The
Yeah.
jets it used in that fight weren't made in Israel, okay? Like, that's the crux of this that I find really interesting, that most people who are focused on Israel's future in a positive way are not willing to really discuss. Like, it's the brand that's being eroded, and you don't want that. Brand is extremely valuable to corporates and to countries.
Yeah, I'll play devil's advocate for a second and say, if you're taking the opposite point of view, you'll say two things. The first thing is, who cares about brand? We destroyed Hezbollah. Hamas has been obliterated. We took Iran back 5 or 10 years in terms of their nuclear program, and now everybody knows not to F with us. So it was nice that we had the cool Western values brand or whatever, but now we have the brand of, actually, we can take on Iran. So, like, if you want to come at us, fine. The other part is, and the Western liberal democratic brand is in free fall. Like, who cares about the Western liberal democratic? What did we start this podcast off with? We started this podcast off with Charlie Kirk getting gunned down at Utah for being in a debate. Like, Western values
Fair.
are all over the place. And if you're going to come at Israel, like Azerbaijan just took Nagorno-Karabakh. We don't see anybody, saying that Azerbaijan is going to be exiled from the family of nations because they took over and got rid of a bunch of Armenians in a territory there. Like, look at all of the different conflicts that are happening around everywhere. So, yes, Israel will have to deal with more media coverage and, gnashing of teeth and things like that. But ultimately, like, who really cares? Like, we're doing the West dirty work. We took out Hamas, Hezbollah, and we set back the Iranian nuclear program 5 to 10 years. If the UK wants to put out statements, great. Until they start actually saying, we're not going to send you the fighter jets, like, we don't really care. That's the devil's advocate, I think. But I hear you on the brand thing.
No, I mean, I think that's a good take. And ultimately, J-20 is a good aircraft. Israel, start learning Mandarin signs on it, or like getting little like things to tape over. Like, Israel's done that in the past, by the way. It wasn't always aligned with the West. And so, by the way, everything you just said does not require killing 60,000 people and bombing like another sovereign nation with a fighter jet. So everything you said is accomplishment of Israel. Taking down Hezbollah. Boom. Yalla. I don't know the Hebrew equivalent of yalla, but like, let's go.
Oh, they just stole it. They say yellow.
Oh, cool. Yeah, there you go. Okay, what's next? What next did you list? Oh, go after Iran's nuclear. Yalla, let's go. Good. Well done. And what was the final one? Like, okay. Oh, Syria. Yes. Boom. You could have done all of that and nobody would have had a problem with it. The problems are, taking responsibility for like an extraterritorial fighter jet attack, not assassination. Why not just get a couple of Mossad guys to go to Doha and kill these people in a civilized manner with like a poisoned dart or some shit? Like, I don't understand with that. And by the way, it would have been more effective because apparently, I mean, Hamas is obviously probably lying. I don't know. But like, they're like, negotiators weren't even there, Like, let's say Hamas is right and you killed a bunch of EAs and social media branding experts for Hamas in this attack. I think that, yeah, so that's what I would say. So I think it's
I think that's a really good point. And maybe the obvious thing is hiding in plain sight. Maybe the Mossad couldn't do it. Maybe they're resorting to this because like Mossad intelligence is less. Maybe their capabilities are less than they used to be, and they couldn't get to Doha and get these guys, and they had to blow them up. I don't know. Or look. Maybe the obvious explanation is hiding in plain sight. It has nothing to do with geopolitics and Israel trying to send a message. It has to do with a very interesting fact. Benjamin Netanyahu, I think, thought that attacking Iran would buy him a couple of years, that he would be able to put these far-right, super ultra-Orthodox political parties that he depends on, he would be able to put them in a box and say, I'm the prime minister of Israel that attacked Persia. All right? But the problem is that he's, I think, now addicted politically, domestically, to performative acts of Israeli power.
And that's where this is domestic politics in my view, because, you know, Qatar is like not a factor of instability in the region. And so,
Yeah.
you know, like I think that it makes no sense other than from a domestic performance. This is not a strategic or a tactical attack that made a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense if you abandon the geopolitical and focus on the domestic politics yet again.
Yeah. Speaking of that, before Israel bombed Qatar, the big news that was happening was Nepal.
Oh yeah.
And this really came out of left field, and it was pretty grisly. I was actually getting sort of Arab Spring Stratfor flashbacks because they were burning the parliament building. They burned the ex-prime minister's wife alive in her home. They were taking ministers and stripping them naked and like beating them in rivers and streams throughout the capital. I mean, like some really grisly stuff. Ostensibly, it all started because there was the Nepali government tried to limit social media use in the country, and they're calling it the Gen Z protest. And everybody just rose up and started beating finance ministers in the street because they were talking about limiting their social media. Of course, like the first question that everybody went to was, oh my God, it's like Nepal and Tibet in the chess game versus India and China. Who is really behind these protests? Is somebody trying to bring down the Nepali government to change is it Nepalese or Nepali? I should have Googled that beforehand. I apologize to the people of Nepal. I'll just have to keep on saying Nepal, the country, rather than whatever the right describers. But anyway, like was somebody trying to push behind the scenes to bring down this particular government? It seems too convenient. My at least initial take from looking at it, and I also confess, like even though Marko and I are geopolitical analysts, like I'm not following Nepal's politics on a daily basis. Like this was not something I had on my bingo card for 2025. None of my clients care about this. Nobody else cares about this. Like as soon as Israel bombed Qatar, this was basically out of the news cycle. But it seems to me that this is a reminder that all politics is local, and that grassroots things can happen that you didn't expect at all. And maybe an India or a China can use this to some effect going on. But probably it's just more like Nepal is not exactly a government known for its stability. Like they cycle through governments quite a bit. Now, they don't beat the finance minister in the street every year, so we do have to address the qualitative difference. But that was at least my first take. Where are you at on this one?
I think Indonesia also had unrest as well recently.
Yes, Indonesia, we should have mentioned that. So lots of widespread protest in Indonesia, and then a cabinet reshuffle by Prabowo, this populist, and he was getting rid of some of the technocrats in the cabinet, so the adults that you would want in the room. So not a good signal for Indonesia. The question with Prabowo was always, was he going, Prabowo was part of the military dictatorship, and he got rehabilitated as this sort of grandfatherly figure that went on TikTok and did a bunch of dances. But his initial cabinet positions and everything else made it seem like he's really just going to distribute a bunch of goodies, and he's going to be a populist, and he's probably going to live like it's the good old days. And you've got Indonesians who really, really loved the previous leader. I mean, Jokowi had high popularity ratings and did a lot of impressive things that were sort of unprecedented in Indonesian politics, and Prabowo was kind of a return to it. So you can see like Indonesia seething and being like, well, we want growth. Where are all the goodies that we were promised? Like nothing is happening in that particular direction. And we should also say earlier this year, Bangladesh also had a government fall. So you can start to put the pieces together of historians calling it the South Asian Spring or whatever fancy phrase they're going to try and compare it to with the Arab Spring. So we've got a lot of instability here. And I was actually I'm in Fargo talking at an ag event, or I was yesterday. And I haven't looked at it this closely, but one of the things that people were talking about was inflation, and people were being worried about inflation, not just in the United States, but globally, and wondering if this is an initial sign that inflation in Southeast Asia and food prices and things like that, maybe that's leading to at least to some of the instability that we're seeing there as well. So, but yes, I think it's important. Indonesia is the more important one, and in some ways the more disturbing one.
I think maybe the takeaway here is you live by the Gen Z, you die by the Gen Z. You get elected with some TikTok videos, like, you better keep dancing. I don't know. I think it's interesting. The headlines in the media about Nepal is the Gen Z thing. That's what's interesting. It's like, you better not ban social media use. Anybody who's a father of teenagers or mother is facing a Nepali style revolt at their home every time you threaten to take away the kids' phones. I have nothing really to comment on Nepal, but I do want to tackle that takeaway, which has been force fed to us by the media, because that's the only thing media knows about Nepal as well, which is that quirk. And I would just say that it's interesting. There are plenty of reasons for the youth to revolt for the past 10, 15 years. When you look at how much baby boomers get back out of government versus, young parents, as an example. Millennials, like think about youth unemployment in the 2010s in the Mediterranean, in the 20s, in the 30s, in the 40%. And yet not a single real revolt at any point. There was Occupy Wall Street, which started in Spain, by the way. Occupy Wall Street kind of took that from Spain. But I remember writing in 2011 or no, 2010 even at Stratfor, here comes generational wars. None of that happened. None of that happened, Jacob. And one of the reasons that was such an epically bad forecast is, there's social stability in the West through various, benefits. You can live at home. Your parents will take you back in. You play computer games. It's fine. But there's also something else, maybe. Maybe we millennials are just not that tough. And of course, like anybody with Gen Z kids would say, well, they're not that tough either. I don't know. I think that they are born in a different era. They're born after September 11th. They're born in the era where, starting a podcast off by, like reflecting on Charlie Kirk's life and his approach and his, humor would make us look weak. They were born in a world of much more aggression in social media, much more hate, much less institutional power, much more strong men doing what strong men do, and so I feel that Gen Z is not who millennials are. And
I think that's probably true. And there's one more thing I want to add to this, which I should have said in the lead-in, which is, the Nepalese government, I Googled, it's Nepalese. The Nepalese government didn't just wake up one morning and decide to ban social media platforms. What happened was they asked social media platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, and WeChat, so pretty broad strokes here, to basically register with the government and comply with new requirements related to content. And I don't know the specifics of the requirements, but I think it also shines an interesting light on that relationship between these global tech companies and social media platforms and governments. Like, do you register with the government? Do you censor things because the government wants to? Are Facebook and WeChat and all these others halfway responsible for this because they wouldn't, work with the Nepalese government? Like, I don't think that they were. But there's also like an interesting nexus there between these social media companies and the governments themselves, and what governments are asking those companies to do, and what happens when the companies are just like, no. And then Gen Z comes and like, yeah, see, like we're with the social media companies, not with you guys, you finance ministers,
No, I think if you're a member of the Gen Z and you have a phone and you're in Nepal, it's probably your way to connect with, other members of your generation and also the world. So you are stripping away something that is a quality of life. Now, you and I as fathers of kids, we might shake our fist at social media, but, it has become a fabric of Gen Z and Alpha generation in a way that, if it's taken away, they're going to be mad. But I also think that it's interesting is this, we'll see what Gen Z is like in truth over the next 4 to 8 years. And we will see also what Alpha is like as well. And, the fact that Skibidi Toilet Song is their favorite YouTube clip should worry policymakers. That's the Alpha. The Alpha that's coming up behind Gen Z. Oh, boy. Good luck with those.
Yeah. All right, we've got 15 minutes to do justice to our last two topics. Let's start with the Buenos Aires elections. You were just in Argentina.
Yeah.
A pretty big defeat for the Milei government. It was 47.4% to 34%. This was a local election. The big midterms are coming in October, but the Milei government sort of went out of its way to present this local election in Buenos Aires as a referendum on their performance so far, and the performance was not so good. Milei has already come out and said, we have to accept that, what the voters said, and we have to make changes. He's talking about, a large nationwide broadcast on Monday in which he plans to reassert Argentina's, economic course and what he wants to do and what he wants to do with the budget. There was an interesting article on Buenos Aires Times, which talked about how I can't believe that it's almost Milei's third year in office. I feel like he was elected just yesterday. But that Argentine presidents have a tendency to fall in their third year. Like Kirchner fell, Macri fell, Fernandez didn't fall, but like Sergio Massa really took over the reins. Like, seems to be that year three is not so good. Inflation rate numbers came out actually today or yesterday about Argentina weren't so bad, but if you look at sort of the peso, like Argentina's decision to basically peg to the dollar in April is starting to lead towards more inflation. And it seems like the longer they stick with the dollar peg, the more things are going to get worse. So like, doesn't really matter what policies you get, you're still getting the same sort of situation in Argentina. But you were just there. Tell us your impressions on the ground and how you read the macro.
Well, everyone's members of the business community and finance community were very, very depressed. Most investors hope that Milei can turn Argentina around. And I don't think we do have enough time to really do this topic justice, because there's just a lot that Argentina, that's wrong with Argentina, but also that why is this an important topic for our listeners? It's important because Argentina has been a model for this kind of state intervention into capitalism. And the term is Peronism. Nobody really knows what that means, including Argentinians. But Peronism is not socialism. It's actually a form of government that's very capitalist. It's capitalism for sure. There's, public property, there's private property. The delivery of public services is actually not that good. Peronism is about interest groups in the economy entrenching their position through patronage links with the government. And what that means is that, the telecommunication company basically just writes the regulation for telecoms. It gets that benefit from the government by supporting the government. And so there's this very, very, nepotistic marriage between labor and corporate interests and the government. And that creates a lot of inefficiencies. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because Milei is a breath of fresh air from the perspective that he wants to curb inflation, he wants to cut the deficits. Those are things he can do. And he's also a macroeconomist, so he knows how to do them. And he has put really smart people into the central bank and the finance ministry, and they know how to do it. They know how to bring inflation down from triple digits to double digit. They know how to get a primary surplus. The problem is that a central bank governor can't defeat inflation. Inflation is fundamentally a political problem. And in Argentina, the problem is that unions have too much power. There's a bifurcated labor pool, and there are all these government special concessions made to the leaders of various industries so that there is no competition. So what happens is prices keep going higher and higher. And so what that means is that the first 2 years of Milei's, rule, I don't want to say they were easy. It's very difficult to do what he did, and I salute him. But the problem is that the next 2 years are even harder, because now you can't rely on the central bank to keep interest rates high to bring down inflation. Now you have to actually go and tell unions, we have to curb your power. You have to go to the large corporates that benefit in Argentina from this Peronist sort of statism. And you have to tell them, hey, listen, man, we need to create competition. You will lose your market share. And that's where it doesn't really help to be a macroeconomist. That's where some politics would be very important. And a couple of mistakes that he made, which cost him in Buenos Aires, is first of all, this bizarre reliance on his sister to effectively be chief of staff. What I just said should sound very weird. Even if she was the best person for the job, it still smells funny. And of course, there was a problem where some audio tapes were released where she was brought up as a potential, someone that needs to be paid off. I don't know the legitimacy of that. I don't want to get into it, but that was one of the reasons he suffered. And the other issue is that he was very abrasive in his first 2 years, and he did not want to make real connection with the governors of states of Argentina. He didn't really try to make alliances. And I think that in his speech after the defeat this week, he was very contrite. And that was a new Milei. It was really smart. Because the thing is, we cannot judge whether voters in Argentina are voting against his plan based on this one election. We cannot judge that. I think, and I mean, look, month and a half, we can go and talk about this in October. In October, we will have the midterm. In October, we can judge. We cannot judge that yet. I think that this was really about his cabinet and some, I mean, Milei sold himself as a very morally on the high ground. That shine came off. I think that's what this election was about. And I think the other issue that happened was, I mean, it was just, look, the rhetoric, the execution. I think the voters still want the reforms. And the reason this is really important is because the world is watching Argentina. The whole world is watching. And they're watching if Argentinian voters are sick and tired with the state involvement in capitalism in an inefficient way and with inflation. Should I be, as a leader of, let's say, some random country, should I be taking a lesson from that? Should I be worried about policies I've put in place? And I think that's why this is such an outsized and important question, and why it will influence all of our lives over the next 10 years.
The biggest surprise to me about Milei since he was elected was how pragmatic he's been. And to your point, like he's talking about reviving the Interior Ministry. He's already reached out to some governors, according to some Argentinian news reports. He's trying to put things back together. And Peronism, for those of you who want to deep dive into Peronism, actually on my podcast, we did this week. We looked at Peronism and the Latin Americanization of U.S. politics. So if you want that, or if you're having trouble sleeping and you want to hear about that, you can go over to Jacob Shapiro podcast and listen to all you could ever want to know about Peronism.
You should really do that.
You
should because when people say that, what is Donald Trump? What is his form of government? I've often thought that Peronism is a very good way to think about it. Peron was not a socialist. Peron was effectively what we would call corporatist, and the most negative way to say it is fascist. But Peron was fascist before fascism became bad. Peron was fascist when Mussolini was actually making some incredible inroads in Italy. And Mussolini was getting Italy to finally be a country. And then eventually, fascism aligned itself with the Nazis and with, the Holocaust, and it was very, very bad. But in the 1930s, fascism was like, look at this. You sit the corporate world with the unions at the table, you get them to agree. Well, it's not so bad. This is like a good way to, the government becomes the deal maker. And all you need to do as a corporate or a union leader is support the government in charge. Not any other government, not the socialists, not the liberals talking about norms. No, just us, the Peronists. And that is, I think the problem with that is that too much of that leads to inefficiencies in the system. Just as any involvement of the government. I think government involvement in capitalism obviously makes sense in many, many ways. But the problem is that eventually it's difficult to stop that. And I think that we are seeing early signs of that. I think some of my clients and some of the media overblows some of the Trump policies, like taking 20% stake in Intel is not going to end or break America. And it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of members of the Trump administration have made a really good defense of that, like Stephen Miron in the latest Barron's article about him. The problem is, okay, but if that becomes then the thing that the government does from now on, then that's a different question. And that's where I think that Peronism is very important to study. And the fact that Argentina is effectively rejecting it is also, I think, important to study.
Yeah. All right, this is a nice segue, but we've only got a few minutes here to talk about tariffs. So President Trump's has been using something called IEEPA, which is this bill called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It's fairly old, to push through his tariffs. You don't need to be a lawyer to know that Trump's tariffs are illegal. IEEPA, in the law, there is no mention of tariffs whatsoever. Constitutionally, the power to raise taxes and tariffs goes to Congress, not to the president. But President Trump has just been pushing through. But he's finally getting some pushback from the courts. So I believe it was a district court, I forget which one, ruled against him. Ruled against him 7-4, by the way, which I thought was interesting. That there were 4 judges who were willing to say, "Nah, this looks good," even though it's clearly like illegal. But so now the Supreme Court has agreed to take it up. A Supreme Court where Donald Trump has appointed some of its members. It's a much more conservative court. And there are suspicions that maybe it will support President Trump. As I read it, if it's just reading the face of the law, it has to strike down these tariffs because they're obviously illegal. But this was something you wanted to raise. So why is it on your mind?
Well, first of all, I don't know if they're all illegal. I don't.
I'm going out there and saying I think they're obviously illegal. I've read the Constitution, and not often will I wade into legal waters. I think it is fairly obvious that with the congressional authority that President Trump has been currently delegated, most of, not all of them, but most of the tariffs are illegal just on the face.
Well, and that's
I would say. But I'm not the one who makes judges. I'm the one who's on the podcast talking.
Look, so. The Congress has basically passed the authority to raise tariffs to the executive over the past 100 years with numerous pieces of legislation. IEPA is a little bit troubling because it, as you say, it doesn't necessarily mention the word tariff, but it mentions other things that could be interpreted as tariffs. But for example, the 1930 legislation or Section 301 of another, I forgot the year, but there were many, many pieces of legislation passed by Congress that specifically said, yes, the president can raise tariffs. Most of them, however, have a deadline. So you can raise tariffs with the 1930 Trade Act. You can raise tariffs, but for 5 months. And so then it expires. And then if you were to renew them, I do think you would be taken to court for the same reason as now. Fundamentally, why? The fundamental reason that Trump is taken to court is that the executive cannot raise revenue willy-nilly, cannot impose new taxes, cannot cut spending. By the way, that's another thing that's happening. President Trump wants to cut spending, but he can't. Congress has given the Department of Education $7 trillion. Well, you know what? You can fire everyone from the Department of Education, but then you still have to take the $7 trillion, put them in the empty offices, and set them on fire. That is how the law works. Congress controls the purse. And so you are right. It does smell illegal. Is the Supreme Court going to uphold it or not? I wouldn't bet on that. Now, why is it important? It's important because President Trump passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. And that bill, without tariff revenue, is a problem. With tariff revenue, that bill is paid for. No, we can quibble or how much is...
We can definitely quibble over a couple trillion, but yes, you're on this island by yourself. I am not on the island with you that the bill, even with the tariff revenue, is cool. But I'm happy to wave at you at the island and throw you some...
Well, my island has very nicely built summer home because the math is solid. With the tariff revenue, the bill does not expand the U.S. deficit at all. It actually shrinks it mildly. And where you could argue is, Marko, your mansion doesn't have air conditioning. And that would be, well, yeah, but it keeps it at 6%, bro. It does, the deficit doesn't decline. And that's fair. But why am I pointing this out? I'm just pointing it out because if Supreme Court rules that these tariffs are illegal, then One Big Beautiful Bill almost definitely is profligate. And I think the bond market of the US at that point could riot. And so the irony, Jacob, is that we're in a world where the stock market is up, everything is fine, but it's almost fine because of the tariffs, and we could go down because the tariffs are made illegal. Stock market is not going to go up. It's going to go down if the Supreme Court takes away the tariffs.
That's a take. You got to get some air conditioning on the summer home on the One Big Beautiful Bill Island.
Stock market will tank. And the reason it will tank is because bond yields are going to go up. If bond yields go up into a slowing economy, that means borrowing rates for the private sector are rising. As the economy is slowing down, that will absolutely crush equities at that point. And I don't think equities are going to cheer. The fact that there is no revenue coming in to pay. The biggest question for America today is not AI, it's not tariffs, it's not this or that. It's is America responsible about its debts or not? And the bond market was satiated with the tariff revenue that Trump brought. And if that's taken away, I kind of agree with Trump. I mean, he said it will be the end of the United States of America, but I don't know if that's true, but I do think that directionally, I'm in his camp. It would actually be a negative for the economy and for the markets.
I could imagine a few things you could cut, though. Like maybe instead of ICE agents arresting 300 South Koreans who are building a factory for American workers to work at, you could take some of the money away from ICE and from the military-industrial complex.
Jacob, to be clear, there are much better ways for you to raise revenue in the United States of America or cut spending than tariffs. I 100% agree. But that is what we got. So,
yeah.
I mean, look, the best way to do this is just to come clean and say we need a federal VAT tax. Sorry. Across the board, VAT that doesn't just isolate foreign producers. I mean, that would solve the problem much easier. But obviously, for ideological reasons and political reasons, it's very difficult for a Republican president to say, I'm going to tax consumption. So the semantic he's using is I'm going to punish foreign producers. But he's actually taxing consumption. Tariffs are a tax.
Yeah.
And we need that tax.
Tariffs are a tax. And taxes are levied by Congress. It's sort of damned if you do or damned if you don't. Because if what you're saying is true, and markets tank because the tariffs are gets taken down, that's door A. Door B is the Supreme Court says, nah, like tariffs, like the White House can do this, like the president has this authority. And to take us full circle, that is Peronism, a constant state of emergency in which a president can do whatever he wants because I've got this emergency and that emergency, so I have to have this tariff and that tariff. That is not what the founders designed or intended.
Right? Tariff is just the semantic. You can say, well, to solve the housing emergency, we're going to create a fee, or we have a banking emergency. So like, if the president of the United States of America can suddenly impose fees and transaction taxes and tariffs, then yes, you've usurped the power of Congress. And ultimately, look, I mean, you could also say you feel bad for Trump because Congress doesn't have the balls to raise taxes. I mean, that's the truth as well. They have not come up with a feasible way to cut spending and increase revenues. So Trump came up with one for them. But as you say, it may very well be illegal.
All right. We'll talk again next week, Marko. That was a 6-pack, and we didn't even get to autocrats and some of the other things on our list. So we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up next week. Have fun in Denver and don't get pneumonia, okay? We can't deal with that.
I will try. Thank you, Jacob.